Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with fulfillionaire Carly Anna. Carly is a fulfillment and business coach and the creator of the Midas Academy. The Midas Academy is an academy dedicated to helping entrepreneurs, leaders, and coaches build a fulfillment-first life and business. In this week's episode, we talk about transitioning from one career to another, being burnt out, having a career with meaning, your quality of life, ego, trolls, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Carly, Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Blake. How's it going?
Very well. Do you ever get people that, because you've got two kind of first names, does anyone ever get confused? Do you ever get Anna Carly?
Sometimes people will call me Anna, but it's actually my first and my middle name.
What do you mean it's your first and middle name? What do you mean by that?
So Carly is my first name, Anna is my middle name.
Oh, I thought it was your surname. Does anyone else get that confused?
Yeah, I think a lot of people just kind of assume that either it's my first full name or it's just like my last name, but I just prefer to drop my last name off the internet, and so I have.
Did you drop it officially the internet is kind of official these days, but did you drop it officially or just off the internet?
No, just off the internet.
Fascinating. All right, I've already learned something. That isn't what we're here. We're not here to talk about your name. We're here to talk about all things fulfillionaire and everything else. So before we get started, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what has got you to where you are today?
I absolutely can. So I started out my career on the pathway to being a psychologist. I was pretty hell-bent on I was going to go into clinical psychology, and that was where I was going to spend my career. And I went down the pathway of bachelor's, master's, worked for 7 years as a therapist, and burnt out so many times in that time that it kind of got to the point where I stopped and I looked around and I said, this environment is not changing. Something else has to change. I've done so much work on myself. Nothing is working here. And I honestly cannot face the next 40 years of working for somebody else and just using, 4 weeks a year to travel and do all of the things that I want to do with my life. And so I kind of started thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something else out here. And that was where coaching dropped into my awareness, as it does. And this was way before coaching is the thing that it is right now. And I think, what was it? Maybe 6 years ago, 2017, 7 years ago. And I came home from work one day and I walked into the lounge. I sat down next to my husband, my then partner, and I just said to him, I'm done. I can't do this work thing anymore. I have to go and I'm going to start a business. I'm going to be a coach. And he looked at me and he was like, what on earth is a coach? And I was like, I have no idea, but I'm just going to go and figure it out. And that was the start of this business trajectory that has brought me to today, which is being able to have the absolute joy to work with business owners and leaders and coaches for a few things, mostly to find more fulfillment in what they do and in their work, and more freedom in that as well. So all of the things that come wrapped up in that, getting to work less hours and have more freedom and allowing themselves to make more money. But also a big part of my work as well is helping coaches to master psychology. So understanding a lot of what I learned throughout my degrees and through my years as a therapist, and helping them use those skill sets in coaching, because as we know, there's so many, different modalities within the coaching industry. Some of them are higher quality than others, and that's what we do. We equip coaches with the ability to know which strategies are going to get their clients to where they want to go the fastest. So I run the Midas Academy, which is an academy that's built for a number of different programs and different offers, and everything is housed under that one banner.
Beautiful. Good intro. There's a
Yeah,
lot in
thanks.
that. So
So much.
there's a lot in that. The first thing that stood out to me was, and you just said it kind of with ease, was the transition. And
Mm.
it blows my mind how many people would be in a similar position to you who are stuck in their own way. But like, how long did that transition take from fuck this, I can't do it anymore, to, oh, I'm a coach and I have a coaching business?
Good question. So I can give you pretty much exact dates. So it was May 2017 that I came home that day and I said, fuck it. It was the next day that I signed up to a coaching school, paid my deposit, started. It was probably about a week after that that I had my first coaching client who was just a peer at the coaching school. Like I'm not one to fuck around. I just dive right in. And then I would say that it was probably about 6 months later that I had a few like paying clients on my books and I started, my work were really, really good. They let me start like dropping days. And so for a while I dropped 1 day a week and then I went down to, I think it was like 7 days a fortnight. And in May of 2018, so a year after I first made that decision, I just went, I've got to go all in, and I quit my job. And I didn't have a safety net at all. I didn't have my income replaced. Looking back, I'm like, what on earth were you doing? Why did you do that to yourself? But I did make it work, though those next few months were pretty shaky. But it was by September later that year, so what, 18 months after first deciding, that I had a full book of clients and I had like more than doubled what my old yearly salary was as a therapist.
One thing you said there, and I don't want to detract anyone from leaping, but it is like, if many of us did the pros, the cons, and the SWOT analysis, and really took a lot of time to think about it, we probably wouldn't have jumped.
Yeah,
Is that
I
something that you
definitely.
find in the conversations that you have, and even for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's where emotion takes over logic. So logic said, don't quit your job. Logic said, make sure you've got a backup. Logic said, make sure you replace your income before you leave. But emotion said, I can do it. Emotion said, I want this. Emotion said, you've got to go all in. And I think it's those moments where it kind of doesn't really make sense, but you make it work anyway. I think those moments are the moments that make you, because it's when it does make sense, it's like really not that special, but you put yourself in that position and then you come out the other side and you're like, oh yeah, I did that. That was me. I did that.
One of the things you mentioned in that intro as well was burnout. What's your belief around burnout and what leads to burnout? Because for a lot of people, I would assume their automatic response is, oh, she must have been stressed, which can definitely be an element of it. But what do you see as burnout, both personally and professionally?
So I actually wrote my entire master's thesis on occupational burnout. So great question. So I think this is such a great question because I think there's a lot of people who just think that burnout is I'm tired or I'm really stressed, and it's really not. If you look at all of the research that surrounds burnout and the tests that you would go through to determine if you are burnt out or not, they rate you on three different things. One is your level of emotional exhaustion. So it's not just I'm tired, it's your level of actually I'm at the end of my emotional tether. The second thing is what's called depersonalization, which is another word for cynicism, which really means like you become really cynical about your clients, about your work. It's kind of like you actually get really detached from them, and work that you once cared about becomes work that you are so dissociated from that you just don't care about it anymore. And then the third piece is that you have these decreasing feelings of professional accomplishment. So it's kind of like, I'm not making a difference, I'm not getting anywhere, this isn't working, I'm not actually going anywhere in my career, or I'm not making a difference. So actual burnout will rate you on a number of different like scores within that inventory, and it will give you essentially a score of burnout. And so that's what actual legitimate burnout is. And so that's something that I had gone through multiple times and scored really highly on that. And it was because of that that I decided to do my thesis on burnout. So we actually tested an online training program, which is very similar to coaching, as a tool to help behavioral therapists, which was the job that I used to do, to decrease their burnout. And we had amazing results. And that was kind of one of the catalysts for me going, I have to keep going in that work because it's obviously something that's needed. It's something that I love doing, and like it's effective. I'm actually making a difference. And that was one of those first moments where I was like, I'm seeing the difference between this job that I thought that I cared about, and there's part of me that still does, but there's another piece of this career that could go off in a different direction, and I could go down that way instead.
One of the things you mentioned, and I'd be interested to see if you've come across this research, I think it's by the Gallup Institute. It was a massive research that I think I first read about in Lost Connections. And they spoke about 87% of people being disengaged or dissociated in their role. Like essentially based on their data, I wonder if you've got the same data, there was 13% that are actively engaged. So give or take, 1 in 10 actually kind of like and are kind of engaged in what they do. That is disturbing.
It's pretty crazy, isn't it? Like that's the world over. That maybe 10% or 13% of the world actually like getting up and going to work and doing what they do. And I think that speaks to how many of us as like millennials and, Gen X and Gen Z have been like, wait a minute, why are we working for somebody else's company? Like, why don't we just do this ourselves? And here we all are.
What do you think based on the research you've done? I know this is kind of a former life and we'll get into kind of fulfillionaire in a sec, but what are they telling themselves? Is it this 87%? Is it like this is as good as it gets? Is there a level of delusion, denial? There's obviously a level of dissociation, but what are the stories? What are the most common stories that they're telling themselves that are keeping them stuck in this 87%, do you think?
I think it's different culture to culture, and this is just my take on it. And this is not necessarily based on any kind of research, but this is my take on it, looking at like the way that people relate to work differently across the world. And I think that's also generational too. So if you think about like our parents and our grandparents, the function of work was just to make money to survive. And the younger generations, us and younger generations coming through now, we've also got this opportunity for work to have meaning. And it's not hard if you spend 5 minutes a day on the internet to hear people talk about the importance of purpose and, the importance of caring about what you do. And you can't go 5 seconds without actually seeing someone talk about that. And so when you don't have that, you start questioning, right? And then you have this dissonance between like, oh, wait, that's possible. And that's what other people have, but I don't have that. Whereas I think, generationally, that wasn't always the case. It was just kind of like, get up, go and do your job, go and do the thing, and then come home and you've got food on the table. And I think across different cultures, that's probably true as well.
When it comes to fulfillionaire, what's the before and after for you? And that, I mean, the example that you've spoken about so far is career, but if we do a life summary, what's the difference between before and after when it comes to fulfillionaire?
Yeah, awesome question. So for the listeners to know, the fulfillionaire is like part of my brand. So it's part of a program that I offer, and it's a podcast that I run as well. So the idea behind the fulfillionaire is kind of like the antithesis to burnout. So we have all of these entrepreneurs coming into working for themselves from jobs that they were disengaged from careers that were really stressful, from working long hours and burning themselves out. Like that's a really common experience for a lot of people to quit their jobs and go into working for themselves for those reasons, right? Like I think we can all kind of attest to that in some way, shape, or form. And what they don't realize is simply changing the environment isn't actually going to resolve the reasons why they were burning out and disengaged in the first place, right? Part of it is environmental for sure, but part of it, as we know, is how we relate to the environment. It's how we think about the things that go on around us. It's those habits and behaviors that we're conditioned into that are actually contributing to our disengagement and boredom and, lack of fulfillment in the first place. So you get a lot of people coming into business and they spend the first few years just figuring out how to make money. Perfect. That's amazing. I think that's what we all need to do. And then they get to the point where they look around and they're like, oh my God, I'm just as stressed or I'm just as burned out and I'm actually not any happier. And what's going on? Like, is there something wrong with me? And that's where the Fulfillionaire brand comes in, because it's like, now that you've got this environment that is better, let's make it as great as we possibly can. So your relationship with your work and the way that you run your business and the way that you lead your team and the relationships within, your clients and the client work. But also let's look at the internal factors within you that are in conflict with you feeling fulfilled. So, the feeling like you have to be working all the time, otherwise you're unworthy, or the feeling of like you have to keep chasing these money milestones like one after the other because, oh my God, what is someone going to think of me if I don't keep up with the Joneses? Like all of that conditioning still keeps playing out in our businesses. And that's the work of the Fulfillionaire, whether it's the membership that I run or the mastermind that I run or my private coaching. It's looking at both of those things. How do we set up your environment for you to be the most fulfilled you can? And how do you set up your relationship to everything in your life and business for the best possible outcome?
I think most people have heard of the term like keeping up with the Joneses, but fuck, it runs deep. It runs deep in our psyche. Like you can try to logically, like I'm not going to keep up with the Joneses, but it runs deep. It's really interesting. I've been listening recently to some of Morgan Housel's work around the psychology of money and people's relationship to it. And keeping up with the Joneses is one of the things that keeps us stuck. Like what else are you noticing in terms of the conditioning and the programming that's stopping people from being fulfilled?
So the big things are doing work that they actually don't want to do and thinking that they have to do, like they have to sacrifice themselves and, tick boxes or do it in a certain way that actually they don't want to do. So that can sometimes look like, I've got to run this program because it's been working for me and it's making me money, but actually I don't want to do it anymore. Or, I've got to work with this ideal client because they're the one who can afford to work with me, but actually I hate working with that ideal client. So it can be around like the work that we do and the way that we relate to that. Time is a big one. So one of the big things that I work with clients around is not just quality of life in relation to their business, but quality of life outside of business, right? Like it's awesome that you have a business that you love being in, but the goal is for you to have a life that you don't need to escape from. Like we want you to have the things in your life that light you up, whether that's just having the time to pick your kids up from school, or whether it's that you get to be a digital nomad, or whether it's just that you have time to learn how to crochet, like whatever it is, like we want you to have the time to do those things. But what holds so many people back from that is them telling themselves the story of, I don't have time, or I have to be busy to be worthy, or they feel so unsafe the moment they step back from working that they're like, oh my God, how is it possible that I could ever go and create a life that I actually want to create, right? And then, like you mentioned, the relationship with money as well, that constant push of like, I need to make the next amount. I need to make the next amount. And there are certain portions of the coaching industry in particular that have really exacerbated that. And they've created, sections of the industry, whether it's on purpose or not, I'm really not sure, where it's just cool to keep making more and more money. I saw a post a few weeks ago that said multi-millions is the new millions. And I was like, what? Like nobody needs multi-millions to be fulfilled and happy in life. If you want to make that, and if you being in the best expression of your business and working with the most amazing clients creates that as a byproduct, then awesome. But there is no need for us to be continuing to like chase these milestones just blindly just because someone else tells us that we can. So there's like all of the conditioning that comes within the online business industry as well that I think conflicts with a lot of people's fulfillment because they're just so stuck listening to everybody else that they forget what's important to them.
Well, we're both big on fulfillment. It's part of my brand and obviously a big part of your brand as well. And it's messy, that element of the coaching industry. But it's messy when you don't know what you want because you'll end up chasing a coach's style or, whatever it might be. And Shani and I, obviously Shani works with you now as well. Like the amount of seven-figure coach, cool. It's great terminology. But at the end of the day, a lot of the, whether you're actually making seven figures, when you take all of it out and you kind of look at their overall income, it's like, well, it's actually 200,000. That's a very big difference to a seven-figure, or
absolutely
the seven-figure coach who doesn't have any friends or is extremely overweight, unhappy. Like there's so many elements to that is really worth you taking a step back and thinking. And I really do believe, and there's a lot of coaches that kind of listen to this, that you want to find a person who has similar values. And you're a really good example of that. Like if I was a new coach and I wanted, somewhat of a level of balance, but obviously fulfillment, I would be going to you, like it's a no-brainer as opposed to someone who might position themselves as a seven-figure coach, but they've got 10 staff, they're stressed up to their eyeballs, and you actually don't want the life that they've got. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. What do you... How do you see fulfillment? Like, what does that look and feel like? Because for some people, they might be in the trap of thinking that they constantly need to chase happiness or, that's getting a bit murky, that water for them. So what does fulfillment and being a fulfillionaire look like?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that what fulfillment looks like is different for everybody, because that expression of it, of course, is always going to be different for everyone. And that's, I think, why people get caught up, because they just copy what someone else has and they're like, oh, that'll be fulfilling. But for me, fulfillment is a feeling. Fulfillment is this feeling of, and it's such a strange balance because these seem like opposites, but it's a contentment with where I'm at and a willingness to explore more, at the same time knowing that more isn't necessarily going to make me more fulfilled. It's just like that opportunity for growth, because growth is one of my highest values. So I think a really nice way to encapsulate what fulfillment is knowing what your values are. And I hate talking about values because I think it's just been so overdone and it feels like a really boring, stagnant concept to me. But it's true. Like, you have to know what those priorities are for you and be willing to put them ahead of everything else. And I talk with my clients about creating a fulfillment first business, a fulfillment first life. And that can only really happen when you go, okay, well, these are my priorities right now. And that could be growth, that could be wealth, that could be health, that could be connection, that could be impact, like whatever those values are, and then designing it around that. But to me, the feeling of fulfillment feels like peace. It's like, I'm good. I'm good with myself. I'm good with where I am. I'm good with all of the myriad of emotions that might come up as part of my human experience. Because fulfillment is not happiness. It's not the absence of difficult emotion. It's just a state where it's like, I'm good where I am. I'm fulfilled and satisfied with where I am right now.
Is there, I don't know
what
if
does
you
it feel like to you?
very similar, and this is what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I wonder if I feel like I've seen, you might know the science better than me, but it feels like happiness is, and I'd love someone to be able to break this down for me, but it feels like happiness is dopamine, which comes and goes, and fulfillment is like, is it serotonin that just like stays? The way that the thing that comes to mind based off what you've said, and I completely agree, is fulfillment feels like a state of being, whereas happiness feels like an emotion that comes and goes.
That feels really true to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that state of being is one that you choose and cultivate yourself, right? Versus the happiness is usually the result of something that happens.
Not only that, one thing you spoke of, which is an excellent skill, is the being and becoming. which a lot of people struggle with. The being is the content and the becoming is the evolution.
Mm.
It's a dance that I don't think that many people have been able to dance that well. Most people, I would say, caught in the becoming, like my happiness is there, my success is there, my confidence
Yeah.
is there. What does
Mm.
that look and feel like on a daily basis, the being and the becoming for you?
Mm. Okay, good question. So for me, it's always about assessing what my motivation for becoming is. So what that means is wherever I get like a ping or a desire for something else that's not what I currently have right now, I assess and I get really curious about why I want it. Like, what do I think that's going to give me? And a big question that I had over like my behavior for all of 2023, this was a really big theme for me, was asking myself the question of, if nobody saw me have it and I couldn't tell anybody about it, would I still want it? And for me, that allows me to assess, like, is this just about my ego, or is
It's
this actually
amazing.
something that I want? And that stood me in massively good stead. And I brought it through into like a filter that I had over everything that I said, as well, as often as I could remember. So I would ask myself before I went to open my mouth, like, are you trying to say this so that somebody perceives you in a particular way? Or do you actually have something that you think is like of benefit to somebody else? And that's a really hard one sometimes to kind of tease out. But for me, the difference between being and becoming is the self-awareness and the honesty, the radical self-honesty, to be able to discern the difference between becoming for the right reasons, quote unquote, and becoming for the wrong reasons.
That is phenomenal what you just said. And just a little bit of like space between that stimulus and response
Yeah.
to ask yourself that question would be like, I really do think people underestimate something so simple as the space between your stimulus and response. And I know it's not easy, but like practicing that and even just inserting that question between those two is life-changing in all of those little micro moments. What did you notice, if you're comfortable sharing, but what did you
Mm.
notice in 2023, ideas that you might have stepped into from a egoic place and ones that
Yeah.
actually, when you reassess, were like true for you?
Yeah. Okay. I have a perfect example. So travel is a big thing for me in my life. And in 2022, I was very lucky to, when the world started opening up again, I was very grateful to have a lot of travel that year. I think I traveled for about 4 months, and I did it business class and I did it first class, and I got to stay in really nice places. And I was so proud of that experience because it was the first time I'd ever done that before. And it was very, it was full of growth for me to let myself book travel in that way. And then because, you share it on social media and whatever, and you share the lifestyle. And then I realized that there was a part of me that was getting a lot of validation for that. And there was a part of me then that was like, oh, I could never fly economy class again because what will people think of me? And so then I had to sort myself out, because I was like, you have to be clear with yourself about why you are doing this and if this is actually important to you and if this is still important to you. I was like, okay, well, now I get to find some nuance around when I choose to fly business class over economy class. And I understand the privilege that is inherent within that question that I asked myself. But then I got to create some like nuance for myself. So it's like, okay, so if I'm flying overnight, great. I'll fly business class where I can lie down and I can get a good sleep, because it's the sleep that's important to me. It's the getting to the destination, reset, and having my own space that's important. But if it's like a 5, 6, 7 hour flight, and especially during the day, I'll fly economy class and I'll put that money into my wealth accounts instead. So it's like, what gets to be the best expression of my values in this decision? And finding that nuance and really challenging myself to be like, well, you don't need that and you don't have to do that for your ego. So what do you want to do? And so that was a pretty big moment of just like, okay, well, sometimes I'll just fly economy class and I'll be like gleefully in the back of the plane being like, oh, my shares account has gone up this month, like I get to live my values the way that I want to, not because I get to look a certain way online.
What What was the catalyst for you thinking that way? Like, was there an ego moment? Was there something someone said? Like, what created that where you started being so reflective and introspective around the ego element to these decisions?
I actually had a couple of people in my audience accuse me of caring more about money than caring about clients.
That's
And
that's
that was
strong. That's a
that
strong one.
was that was a real strong one. Like, yeah, that was really challenging. That was really, really challenging. And so that was, I think, part of a kind of like just an unraveling of my motivations throughout all of 2023 and coming to a place where, I was really clear on what was most important to me. I mean, it's always very interesting to see what other people's perceptions are of you, and that's not necessarily always going to be the truth, but sometimes they do invite you into, am I actually in alignment with what's most important to me?
That was actually my next question. How do you, I don't know, we've kind of been in each other's world briefly, so I haven't got long history of you, but how do you navigate feedback in that kind of context, whether it's social media? I mean, close friends, feedback's a very different story, but let's say kind of trolls and social media. Like, what are you, because you've taken that on board essentially. So how do you navigate social media behavior like that?
I think because that was like the first time I experienced it, I handled it very differently to how I would handle it if it happened now. And I did take it on. And I was like, wow, people think that of me. Like, and I went through all of that questioning of like, am I not, showing how much I care about my clients? Is that not clear? Am I coming across this way? And I did really like go through my social media with a fine-tooth comb because I did actually want to know if that was the way that I was coming across. And I went back through and I was like, actually, if I had watched me, I wouldn't think that that was the case. And so that was kind of how I worked myself through it. But now, if someone said that about me, I've done enough work to know myself that someone saying that wouldn't shake me because I know my heart, I know who I am as a person, and I know what's true for me. And someone saying something like that about me is simply their perception, and I can't control that. Like, it's just, you just cannot control what people want to think about you.
It'd be a big process if you decided to take on that challenge, which I don't suggest. A very big process. What have
Oh,
you,
God.
so obviously another part of your world outside of fulfillionaire really relates to coaching coaches in how to coach.
Mm.
Did I get that? Yeah. What are you noticing about the coaching industry? Because you have been, it's like blowing up over the last few years, but prior to that, it was a bit of a slow burn. What have you noticed about the coaching industry, and where do you see, I guess, the pros and the cons of where everything's at the moment?
I think I so I think I probably sometimes have a bit of a distorted view on the coaching industry and where it's at right now because my part of my brand is about advocating for high standards with coaches and evidence-based practice. I do get a lot of clients and people in my audience sending me posts from other people who are saying things that are, blatantly incorrect and things like that. So I think I probably have a sometimes negatively biased view on the coaching industry, and I have to be really careful about that sometimes, that I don't get bogged down by that. But I think that with anything, there's light and there's dark. And I think coaching changed my life, and I can thank coaching for where I am right now, both from having been coached and becoming a coach. So I am obsessed with it as a profession. And I also think that there are so many ways that we could hold ourselves to higher standards when it comes to how we deliver and how we take care of our clients and how we educate ourselves and the amount of professional development that we go through. And also with learning to think critically about some of the modalities that are popularized, because a lot of them are not evidence-based. A lot of them are actually the antithesis of evidence-based. And that can be really dangerous because we end up sometimes having clients where we could be doing harm without even realizing. And I think this is where a lot of people don't realize the potential harm that they could be doing without the right qualifications and without the right experience and without the right knowledge. So while I do believe massively in coaching and the industry in general, I think we have a very long way to go with raising the standards. And because there's no external body doing that, and the only one that is doing that actually advocates for non-evidence-based practice, I think we've got a really long way to go. And that, when I first launched my program, which is called the Midas Coach, when I first launched that, it just felt like I was biting off so much, because I had a lot of people telling me, oh, you're going to change the industry and you're going to do this and this is going to be amazing. And partway through last year, I realized I don't want to change the industry. I just want to provide a really good quality program for the people who want to hold themselves to a high standard. I can't change the whole industry. I don't want to change the whole industry. I just want to make a really great training program for those people who want it, you know? So I really had to kind of pull back and just go, okay, what are my goals here? What's appropriate for me? And that's what I want to do. And moving into the future, so this year is all about getting my business PhD proof, is what I'm calling it. So I'm getting my business ready so that next year I can dive in and start doing my PhD in psychology, because I do really want to contribute to the research that surrounds coaching, because there's really not a lot of it. I want to be able to, educate coaches and say, here's actually what we know works, and really contribute to that body, because that's what legitimizes the profession. It's all of the research and science behind it.
What do you notice about the more formal academic world of psychology, and potentially the things that aren't inclusive in your universities and your colleges, but are getting a lot of traction outside? What's the pros and the cons of the more traditional school of thought when it comes to psychology, do you think?
So I think the way that we have always looked at psychology and having a psychologist is because the psychology field was based upon the medical model of there's something wrong with you and we have to fix it. A lot of people have this negative connotation with seeing a therapist, and there's a lot of stigma attached to that. And so a lot of people have never really accessed therapy when they probably would have really benefited from it, because of that stigma. But the world of psychology has absolutely evolved. We see areas like positive psychology and some of the third wave behavioral therapies, which is what I do with clients. They're much more solution focused, and they're much more about taking a client who's already at baseline and helping them to thrive. So it's not about like, how do we get the person who's barely surviving into baseline? It's about how do we get the person who's at baseline into thriving. And so I don't necessarily think it's like, a problem with getting, psychology out into the world. I think it's like coaching has provided an opportunity for more people to find the help that they need, which is not in a traditional therapeutic context. Does that make sense? And does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%. I find it really interesting because obviously I would consider myself more non-academic than academic. And over the last 3 to 4 years, that bias I've really kind of challenged to sit more in the duality of the two. And I guess as well for me, with the spiritual elements that are going to be very hard to put through your universities and stuff, it's a really interesting, for some people, it's an interesting clash, but I'm more interested in seeing how those two worlds come together and become more powerful as one. But that's the bit that I'm really finding interesting around the traditional path. And I've got a number of mates who have taken a more traditional path, and mine, which has been more non-traditional. So it's an interest. And even like if you really kind of break it down, science versus spirituality, and how do you integrate the two, when it comes to things that are going to be very hard to
quantify. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, like areas like consciousness have been studied for decades, and we're still not really that much closer to understanding what consciousness is. So you're absolutely right. Like there are areas of spirituality and, that it's going to take ages for science to catch up to. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't use them yet if we're seeing that they're being useful in like an applied setting. It just means I think we have to be more careful about it. I think if there's anything that I would love more coaches to take away from the academic world is that ability to be critical and critically think about what we are saying to our clients and what we are sharing on social media. And can you actually see where that piece of research has come from? And is that actually true? Or have you just heard an influencer say it and it sounds really good, so you're just repeating it? Like, let's just get a little bit more critical thought, you know?
That must be a really challenging part for you. I found myself probably in the transition in the health and fitness space when TikTok and everything was really, well, I don't think TikTok was around, but when people who had 6 months experience and 500,000 subscribers or followers, whatever, were giving advice. I was like, fuck, I've been here 14 years and it'd be good to have some kind of governing body, but at the end of the day, it's going to be impossible to police. But you've spoken a couple of times like what an ideal world would look like for you in the coaching space, and you've mentioned like higher standards. If you were to ground what you ideally would like to see coaches embody potentially or practice, what would that potentially look like?
I mean, there are lots of things. I think the way that they conduct themselves with clients, so making sure that wherever they can, that what they're doing is backed in research and that they understand the research and they understand the limitations of that, but also the benefits of that and when to choose one modality over another modality, like really having that critical thought behind how they practice. I think it's one element of it. Another element of it is how we show up online and how we market ourselves, and just, you know, being able to put that filter on whatever we say, and, you know, just being really careful about the dissemination of the information that we put out there. You know, is it ethical for us to be talking about things that we really have no experience in, or that we can't trace back that piece of research in, or that we've just heard somebody else say and it sounds good, you know, like just bringing ourselves up to a high standard around that. And then I think there's a big piece that I've always really advocated with my coaches that I train, and it's the concept of psychological safety. And it specifically pertains to like when we have groups of clients. So obviously it's really popular to have masterminds and group coaching programs and things like that. But in order for those group spaces to be transformative, we have to have people feeling safe to bring themselves and share mistakes and share their learnings and share their questions and things like that. And a lot of coaches don't know how to create that space to be transformational in a group setting. And that takes skill, and that takes a lot of, you know, prioritization above just, I'm going to create this group program that's going to make me a bunch of money so I don't have to work. So those would be a big few that I would be wanting to influence over the next few years.
Really good call on the psychological safety one in particular. Stands out to me. For people who want to find out more about you and your magic, where's the best spot for them to find you?
Come and play on Instagram. That's the best place. So my tag is at the Midas Academy, which we can tag in the show notes for everyone if they want to go and take a look.
Awesome. Carly, we've been in each other's orbit for quite a while now, so it's good to finally get you on the podcast and chats, all things coaching for Fulfillionaire and the Midas Academy as well.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.